In the shadow of the frost-kissed pines, where the wind howled elegies for the forsaken, Ilara's breath formed fragile ghosts in the frigid air, each one a silent plea against the void. The pack's verdict had fallen like an avalanche, swift and unyielding, burying her beneath layers of scorn and isolation. Ilara stumbled through the snow-swept valley, her bare feet numb against the jagged ice that clawed at her skin. They had called her too weak, an omega without fangs or fury, her spirit as soft as the down of a winter hare. No claws to rend, no roar to command. Only words, they sneered, and words were dust in the jaws of war. Her mate, the beta who had once sworn oaths under the full moon, had turned his back first, his eyes cold as the steel of his blade. "You bring shame to the bloodline," he had growled, his voice echoing through the great hall where torches sputtered like dying stars. The Alpha's decree followed, banishment, not death by fang, for that would soil their honor, but exile to the whispering wastes, where the winds carried the bones of the forgotten and the snow devoured the unwary. She clutched the iron ring on her finger, its band etched with faint runes that no one in the pack had ever bothered to decipher. It had been her mother's, passed down through generations of Omegas, whispered to be cursed, with visions rather than strength. The ring felt heavier now, warmed only by the pulse of her vein beneath it, as if it drank the last of her warmth. Blood from a fresh cut on her palm, self-inflicted in a moment of defiance, stained its surface, a dark crimson bead frozen midway, symbolizing the life she refused to let spill entirely. It was no weapon, this trinket, but in the quiet hours of her youth, it had hummed with secrets, maps of alliances unspoken, threads of fate woven in the dark. They had mocked her for it, calling it a bauble for the frail. Now, as the howls of her former pack faded into the night, Ilara wondered if its weight would anchor her or drag her under. The moon hung low, a sickle of silver slicing through the veil of clouds, casting the world in shades of ghostly white and deepest shadow. Snowflakes danced like vengeful spirits, stinging her cheeks and tangling in her unbound hair, which whipped wildly in the gale. The air tasted of pine resin and iron, blood from her cracked lips perhaps, or the distant metallic tang of hidden rivers frozen beneath the earth. Her body ached, not just from the cold that seeped into her bones like a lover's betrayal, but from the deeper wound, the rejection that echoed in her chest, a hollow drumbeat sinking with the wind's mournful sigh. She had never raised a weapon, true. In the pack's endless skirmishes with rival clans, Ilara had lingered at the edges, her hands weaving plans in the smoke of council fires rather than gripping hilts. "Talk your way out of this," her beta had spat during their last raid, when her council might have spared lives but was dismissed as cowardice. 3 kingdoms teetered on the brink of war, the Iron Fang to the north with their armored wolves, the Silver Veil in the east, masters of shadow and poison, and her own Frostclaw blinded by pride. She had seen it in dreams, guided by the ring's subtle pulse, a web of treaties, a marriage of minds over might, peace forged not in blood but in cunning words. But dreams were for the weak, they said. Strength was in the kill, the conquest, the Alpha's roar that shook the mountains. Now, alone in the wastes, Ilara's steps faltered as the terrain shifted from open drifts to the jagged maw of a ravine. The wind carried huevos distants, distant howls that might be wolves or merely the mountain's lament. Her breath came in ragged bursts, visible puffs that dissolved like her hopes. The cold was a living thing, wrapping around her tattered cloak, which she had torn from the hem of her gown in a futile bid for warmth. It fluttered like a broken wing, exposing the pale skin of her legs to the bite of frost. She pressed on, driven by a spark of defiance that burned low in her belly, hotter than any fire. What is strength, if not the will to endure when all else crumbles? The philosophy her mother had murmured in bedtime tales, now a mantra against the despair clawing at her mind. As the ravine deepened, shadows pooled like spilled ink, and Ilara's vision blurred, not from tears, for she had shed none, but from exhaustion. The iron ring seemed to tighten, its bloodied rune glowing faintly under the moonlight as if awakening to her solitude. It whispered of paths unseen, of destinies that twisted like roots beneath the snow. She collapsed against a boulder, its surface slick and unyielding, and curled into herself, the wind's roar drowning her quiet sobs. In this frozen limbo, rejected and adrift, Alara felt the first stirrings of something ancient. Not rage, but resolve. The kingdoms would clash, blood would paint the snow red, but she would not be the weak one they discarded. Her plan, born in silence, would rise like the moon, unseen until it eclipsed the sun. The night deepened, the moon climbing higher, its light a cold benediction on her form. Weavos echoed closer now, or perhaps it was her imagination, the wild calling to the wild within. Alara closed her eyes, the iron ring a talisman against the dark, its stained surface a vow, peace through intellect, redemption through the overlooked. In the heart of exile, she was not broken, merely reforged. The wind's howl sharpened into a predator's snarl as Alara stirred against the boulder, her fingers numbly tracing the iron ring's etched runes. The bloodstain on its surface had crusted over, a fragile scab mirroring the wounds she carried within. Rejection's bite deeper than any frost. She forced her eyes open, the moon's sickle now tilted perilously, spilling silver light into the ravine like spilled mercury. Shadows twisted below, elongated by the terrain's cruel folds, and for a moment she thought the Uivos were her own ragged breaths echoing back, mocking her solitude. Then a sound pierced the gale. Not a howl, but a low, guttural groan, human yet laced with the timbre of something feral. Alara's heart stuttered, her body coiling instinctively as she peered into the gloom. Fear slithered through her veins, cold as the snow seeping into her cloak, but curiosity flickered alongside it, a spark against the encroaching dark. She should run, hide, let the wastes claim whatever fool wandered here. Yet the ring warmed against her skin, an unnatural pulse sinking with the distant thrum in her chest, urging her forward. Cautiously, she rose, her bare feet crunching through the thin crust of ice, each step sending jolts of pain up her legs. The ravine narrowed ahead, its walls scarred by avalanches long past, and there, wedged against a jut of rock, lay the source of the sound. A man, no, an alpha, his form radiating authority even in collapse. His broad frame was clad in a manto rasgado, once a regal cloak of deep crimson wool, edged in silver fur, now torn and bloodied, clinging to his muscled shoulders like a shroud. Snow dusted his dark hair, matted with sweat and grime, and his face, gods, his face was a map of torment. Sharp jaw clenched in pain, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, a fresh gash across his brow weeping crimson that trickled down to stain the white drifts below. He was no ordinary exile. The scent hit her then, carried on the wind, musk of pine and iron, alpha essence mingled with the sharp tang of blood, and something deeper, like embers of a dying fire. King Thorn of the Iron Fang, she realized with a jolt, the very ruler whose kingdom teetered on war's edge. Whispers from pack councils had painted him as unbreakable, a warrior king who had united clans through sheer will, his decrees echoing like thunder across the mountains. But here he was, felled, his chest rising in shallow bursts, one arm cradled against his side where a wound seeped through bandaged leathers. Betrayal's mark, perhaps, the Silver Veil's poison arrows, or a traitor's blade from within. His eyes fluttered open, locking onto hers with a predator's intensity, gold-flecked irises gleaming under the moon like forge flames. Instinct surged through Alara, a tidal pull toward him, her omega nature recognizing the alpha bond before her mind could protest. It was electric, unwelcome, a warmth blooming in her core that chased the cold from her limbs, urging her to approach, to touch, to heal. But she denied it, stepping back, her breath catching in fear. What madness was this? He was the enemy, the king whose ambitions had ignited the spark of conflict her pack now chased. Curiosity warred with terror. Why hide in these wastes? What curse drove a monarch to ground like a wounded wolf? You, he rasped, voice gravel rough, laced with pain and command. He tried to rise, but his body betrayed him, slumping back with a hiss. Blood bloomed fresh on his side, dark against the snow, and Alara's gaze fixed on it, the ring on her finger throbbing in echo. "Stay back, she-wolf. This is no place for the living." His words stung, echoing her pack's scorn. Yet there was no malice in them, only weary resignation, the weight of a crown heavier than any chain. She hesitated, the wind whipping her hair across her face, carrying the metallic scent of his blood to her nostrils. It stirred something primal, a curiosity born not of desire, but of shared ruin, two exiles under the same merciless moon. "You're the one bleeding out in the wastes," she countered, her voice steadier than she felt, though fear knotted her gut. "Iron Fang's king, reduced to begging scraps from shadows. What hunts you?" Thorn's laugh was a bitter rumble, cut short by a wince. He shifted, revealing the glint of a dagger at his belt, unbloodied, untouched, and the manto's tear exposing a tattoo on his chest, a snarling wolf encircled by thorns, symbol of his line's cursed legacy. Guilt shadowed his features, melancholic lines etched deep, as if the weight of fallen comrades pressed upon him. "Not begging," he murmured, eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Fleeing a throne poisoned by my own hand. The Silver Veil's envoy. I trusted too far. Now my kingdom fractures, and yours follows." His gaze dropped to the ring on her finger, narrowing. "That mark, frost claw blood. You're no hunter. Why linger?" The connection tugged again, instinctive, a thread of empathy weaving through the fear. She saw it in his eyes, the ethical core beneath the warrior's shell, the duty that chained him to regret. He was broken, like her, marked by choices that scarred deeper than blades. But she rationalized it away, stepping closer despite herself, drawn by the curiosity of his vulnerability. The moon watched, impassive, as she knelt at arm's length, the snow soaking her knees. "Curiosity," she admitted, voice soft against the wind's roar. "Or pity. Take your pick, king. But if you die here, your wars end with you, and mine begin without mercy." He reached out, not to strike, but to grasp her wrist, his touch scorching through the cold, the iron ring pressing between them like a seal. Blood from his gash smeared her skin, warm and vital, binding them in that visceral moment. Fear spiked in her chest, but so did a forbidden spark. Redemption's whisper, denied yet undeniable. The Weavos grew nearer, shadows stirring in the ravine, and Thorn's grip tightened. "Then help me rise, little planner, or watch 3 kingdoms burn." Alara pulled away, heart pounding, the blood on her wrist a burning reminder. This was no salvation. It was a snare. Yet as she tore strips from her cloak to bind his wound, the fire in her resolve flickered higher, tempered by the Alpha's haunted gaze. Under the moon's cold eye, fear and curiosity birthed something fragile. A bond forged in blood and shadow, resisted but alive. And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The ravine's shadows deepened as Alara dragged Thorn deeper into the cleft, his weight a burdensome anchor against her slight frame. The wind clawed at them like spectral fingers, whipping snow into a blinding veil that stung her eyes and numbed her resolve. Blood from his side seeped through the hasty bandages she'd fashioned from her cloak, warm and sticky against her chilled skin, mingling with the crusted stain on her iron ring. It pulsed now, not just a relic of her exile, but a living tether, its runes faintly aglow under the moon's indifferent gaze. She shoved the thought away, superstition, nothing more. Yet the warmth spread through her palm, a defiant heat against the encroaching frost. "Further!" Thorn grunted, his voice a ragged command laced with pain. He leaned on her more than pride allowed, his muscled arm slung across her shoulders, the scent of him overwhelming. Alpha musk sharpened by blood and the faint, acrid bite of poison lingering in his veins. Ilara's instincts rebelled, her Omega core urging submission, protection, a bond she rationalized as mere survival. He was no ally. He was Iron Fang's king, architect of the tensions that had doomed her pack to war. Yet as they stumbled onward, the distant Weavos sharpened into pursuit. Silverveil trackers, their howls a chorus of venom and vengeance, closing the noose around the waists. The ravine funneled them toward a hidden crevice, a narrow fissure in the rock face veiled by icicles like jagged teeth. Alara had glimpsed it in her youth, during forbidden treks to gather herbs, its mouth a secret the mountains guarded jealously. She pushed Thorn inside first, his broad form scraping against the stone, eliciting a hiss of agony that echoed like a wounded beast's cry. The cave beyond was a womb of ice and shadow, its walls glistening with frozen moisture that dripped in slow, rhythmic plinks, sinking with the thunder of her heart. No fire yet, the smoke would betray them, but the air held a stale warmth, trapped from some geothermal vein far below, a faint sulfur tang cutting through the metallic reek of blood. She eased him down against the far wall, where the rock curved into a natural shelf, and knelt to assess the damage. His manto rasgado pooled around him like spilled wine on snow, revealing the full extent of his wounds. Gashes from arrows, a deeper slash across his ribs, and bruises blooming purple against his pale skin. His eyes, those gold-flecked embers, fixed on her with a mix of wariness and something softer. Gratitude, perhaps, or the first fracture in his armored isolation. "You should have left me," he murmured, his breath forming ghosts that danced in the dim light filtering through the crevice. "The Silverveil's hounds, they smell weakness, yours now too." Alara ignored him, tearing another strip from her cloak to press against the worst of the bleeding. The fabric darkened instantly, absorbing the crimson flow, and she felt the iron ring tighten as if in sympathy, its bloodied rune a mirror to the life ebbing from him. Pain lanced through her own body, not physical, but empathetic, a visceral echo of his torment that made her vision blur. What was this? Not desire, she told herself fiercely. It was the shared curse of the Forsaken, two souls adrift in the moon's cruel theater. The wind outside howled louder, carrying the snap of branches under paws, the low snarls of wolves trained to hunt without mercy. She froze, listening, her hand stilling on his chest. The cave's chill deepened, seeping into her bones, but Thorn's proximity warded it off, his heat a reluctant fire. "They're close," she whispered, her voice barely threading the silence. Fear coiled in her gut, not just for herself, for him, this broken king, whose guilt she could taste in the air, thick as the scent of pine resin. He had spoken of trust betrayed, his own hand in the fracture. She saw it now in the melancholic set of his jaw, the way his fingers twitched as if longing to grasp a scepter long poisoned. Empathy stirred unbidden, softening the edges of her denial. He was no monster, but a man chained by duty, his ethical core scarred by choices that mirrored her own rejection, overlooked wisdom, dismissed counsel. Thorn's hand caught hers, stilling her ministrations. His touch was firm yet gentle, calloused fingers tracing the iron ring with a reverence that sent a shiver through her. "Why aid an enemy?" he asked, his voice low, probing the shadows of her soul. The gold in his eyes caught the faint moonlight, flickering like distant stars, and for a moment the cave felt less like a tomb and more like a confessional under the Deusa's watchful eye. The Weavos peaked, a cacophony rattling the icicles at the entrance, shards tinkling to the ground like fragile warnings. Alara yanked her hand free, scrambling to the crevice's edge. Shadows flitted outside, silhouettes of cloaked figures and prowling beasts, their eyes gleaming red in the night. Silverveil assassins, masters of poison and stealth, drawn by the king's blood trail. One hurled a spear, its tip whistling past the fissure to embed in the cave wall with a crack that sprayed frost. She ducked, heart slamming against her ribs, the cold stone biting into her palms. Thorn surged to his feet despite the pain, drawing his dagger with a growl that vibrated through the air. "Stay down," he ordered, positioning himself between her and the entrance, his body a shield of resolve and regret. Blood trickled anew, staining the snow at his feet. But he stood unyielding, the manto's tatters framing him like a fallen banner. Ilara's breath caught, the instinct to flee warred with a deeper pull, to stand with him, her mind already weaving contingencies. the cave's back vent for escape, the loose rocks above for an avalanche if needed. No weapons in her hands, but plans bloomed in her thoughts, sharp as thorns. A second spear glanced off the rock, and Thorn lunged forward, hurling his dagger with precision born of battles won and lost. It found its mark, a yelp from the shadows, followed by the thud of a body. The howls shifted, frantic now, but retreating as the wind carried the scent of fresh blood away. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breaths and the drip of melting ice. Ilara rose slowly, her legs trembling, and met his gaze. In that shared vigil, fear had forged something unbreakable, empathy blooming into bond, tentative as the first thaw. His hand found her shoulder, steadying them both, and the iron ring warmed again, its bloodied promise a whisper of destinies entwined. Yet as the moon climbed higher, casting silver veins across the cave floor, doubt lingered in her chest, an ethical precipice. To bind herself to this alpha meant embracing the wars she sought to end, trading her solitude for a redemption that might demand her soul. What is mercy, if not the choice to heal what the world deems irredeemable? The philosophy echoed in the silence, unanswered, as the night's chill pressed in, binding them closer in the refugio's fragile embrace. The cave's fragile peace shattered like thin ice under the weight of unspoken truths, the air thick with the coppery reek of blood and the faint, acrid whisper of sulfur from the earth's hidden veins. Ilara sat huddled against the curved wall, her knees drawn to her chest, the tattered remnants of her cloak draped over Thorn like a beggar's shroud. His breathing had steadied, ragged edges smoothed by the cave's trapped warmth, but the gold in his eyes still burned with the fever of wounds, both seen and unseen. The moon's light filtered through the crevice in slender shafts, painting silver streaks across the floor where droplets of melting ice traced erratic paths, mirroring the turmoil in her soul. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the iron ring encircling her finger, its bloodied rune now a dull crimson crust that flaked under her thumbnail. It had warmed during the skirmish, pulsing like a second heartbeat, but she dismissed it as the adrenaline's cruel joke, a remnant of her mother's tales of Omega gifts, visions that bent fate like willow branches in the wind, gifts that had marked her as weak, unfit for the pack's brutal hierarchy. Yet as the distant howls faded into the night's vast silence, a pressure built behind her eyes, a throbbing ache that spread from her temples to the ring itself. The cave seemed to contract, shadows deepening, until the world narrowed to the glint of moonlight on Thorn's manto rasgado, its crimson folds pooling like spilled life at his feet. "What haunts you, little planner?" Thorn's voice cut through the quiet, low and probing, laced with the melancholy of a king who had stared too long into the abyss of his own regrets. He shifted, wincing as fresh pain lanced his side, but his hand extended toward her, not in demand, but in quiet invitation, calloused fingers hovering near the ring without touching. Blood still flecked his skin, dark veins tracing paths down his arm, and Ilara felt it pull at her, an instinctive tide she fought with every rational fiber. He was the enemy, his iron fang banners the spark that ignited her exile. To yield to this bond was to invite chains forged in the fires of war, not the peace she had dreamed in shadowed councils. She shook her head, the motion sending a cascade of unbound hair across her face, damp strands clinging to her chilled cheeks like frost-kissed webs. "Nothing," she murmured, but the lie tasted bitter, like the metallic tang lingering on her tongue from the fear sweat of their defense. The wind outside moaned softly now, a lullaby laced with threat, carrying the faint crunch of snow under retreating paws. Safety was illusory here, a momentary breath before the storm's return. Her fingers tightened around the ring, and suddenly the warmth surged, a living flame that raced up her arm, igniting visions behind her closed lids. It began as fragments, the moon swelling to fullness over jagged peaks, bathing 3 thrones in ethereal light, the Iron Fang's forge-lit halls, the Silvervale's shadowed spires, her own Frostclaw's icy citadel. Blood rivers flowed between them, crimson tides that drowned warriors in futile glory, but woven through the carnage were threads of silver, delicate as spider silk. Alliances unspoken, words sharper than claws. A treaty sealed not in fang but in shared vulnerability. Borders redrawn by minds united against the true enemy, greed's devouring maw. The iron ring burned now, its runes igniting with an inner glow that seeped into her veins, revealing the paths her pack had scorned. She saw Thorn at the center, his crown heavy with guilt, but beside him, an Omega's hand guiding the web. Her hand, steady and unyielding, crushing the cycle of war with intellect's quiet blade. Ilara gasped, eyes snapping open, the visions receding like mist before dawn. Sweat beaded her brow despite the cave's chill, and she clutched her wrist, the ring's heat fading to a smolder. Thorn leaned forward, his face etched with a dawning intensity, the gold flecks in his eyes flaring as if the moon itself had kindled them. He had felt it too, the air humming with ethereal energy, the shadows twisting into shapes of wolves and crowns. "That light," he whispered, voice rough with awe and something deeper, a recognition that pierced her defenses. "The ring. It's no bauble." "What did you see?" She recoiled, heart pounding against her ribs like a caged beast, the cave's walls pressing in with the weight of revelation. Fear coiled tight. This was her curse, the gift that had branded her weak, unfit for the pack's roar. To share it meant vulnerability, a surrender to the alpha whose touch still lingered on her skin like a brand. Yet the bond tugged insistently, empathy blooming from their shared refuge, transforming denial into reluctant trust. "Visions," she admitted finally, her voice a threadbare whisper carrying the scent of pine and blood on each syllable. "Paths, not of battle, but of peace. The three kingdoms, entangled in a web I can unravel. But it's madness. They called me weak for dreaming such things." Thorn's hand closed over hers then, gentle yet unyielding, his thumb tracing the ring's edge where blood and rune intertwined. The contact sent a shiver through her, warmth chasing the cold from her core. But she did not pull away. In his touch, she sensed his fracture. The ethical king burdened by a betrayal he could not unmake, his duty a noose of guilt that mirrored her exile's sting. "Weak?" he echoed, his laugh a hollow rumble that echoed off the icy walls. "You see what I cannot. Destiny's weave hidden in the dark. The silver veil's poison was my folly, trusting shadows over light. But you're the key, Ilara, the pathfinder, born to mend what alphas break." The words hung between them, heavy as the moon's pull, stirring a whirlwind in her chest. Resistance crumbled under the weight of truth. This was no mere instinct, but revelation's forge, hammering her resolve into something sharper. The cave filled with the soft drip of ice, a rhythmic heartbeat underscoring the moment, while outside, the wind sighed as if the Dusa herself approved. Thorn's gaze held hers, melancholic depths reflecting her own rebirth, not as the rejected Omega, but as the architect of fates. Blood from his wounds scented the air, a visceral reminder of the cost. Yet in that shared silence, the iron ring pulsed once more, its light a beacon against the encroaching dark. What is destiny, if not the courage to claim the visions others fear? The philosophy whispered through her mind, unanswered, as the bond solidified, fragile yet unbreakable. Thorn released her hand slowly, but the warmth remained, a promise etched in blood and moonlight. The night deepened, the cave a sanctuary of secrets unveiled, where rejection's ashes birthed the flame of purpose. Yet doubt lingered at the edges, a shadow of choices yet to come. To wield this gift for him, for peace, or to flee into the wastes alone. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The moon's sickle had sharpened into a blade of judgment by the time the cave's fragile sanctuary cracked under the weight of pursuit, its silver light fracturing through the crevice like veins of ice in stone. Ilara's visions lingered in her veins, a feverish hum that made the iron ring throb against her skin, its bloodied rune a crimson scar echoing the revelation she could no longer deny. Thorn's words, Pathfinder key, hung in the air like smoke from an unseen fire, stirring a tempest in her chest. Awe, warring with terror, the pull of destiny clashing against the chains of her past. She rose from the cave's floor, her bare feet silent on the slick rock, the chill seeping upward like doubt's insidious creep. Outside, the wind's howl carried a new urgency, not the wild's lament, but the orchestrated snarl of organized hunters, her former pack, the Frostclaw, drawn by whispers of the king's flight and the scent of blood that bound them all. Thorn stirred beside her, his manto rasgado whispering against the stone as he gripped his dagger, the blade's edge catching moonlight in a cold gleam. Pain etched deeper lines into his face, but his gold-flecked eyes burned with the resolve of a monarch cornered, guilt's shadow yielding to duty's fire. "They come for me," he murmured, voice gravel rough, laced with the melancholy of betrayals past. "But you, your pack will sense the bond now, faint as it is. The ring's light. It calls them like a beacon." He reached for her, not to command, but to steady, his touch a spark that chased the frost from her limbs, yet she pulled back, the instinctive warmth clashing with rational fear. This connection, born in refuge and revelation, now threatened to drag her into the fray she had always woven plans to avoid. The first howls shattered the night. Frostclaw wolves, their cries a chorus of scorn and vengeance, echoing through the ravine like judgments from the Deusa herself. Ilara's heart clenched, memories flooding unbidden. The great hall's torchlight flickering on faces twisted in rejection, her beta mate's cold eyes dismissing her as he turned away, the alpha's decree banishing her to these wastes. They had called her weak, a dreamer unfit for the pack's iron code, her words mere whispers against the roar of war. Now, those same voices bayed for blood, led by the traitor she had long suspected. Kale, her former mate, whose ambition had poisoned the council against peace, allying secretly with the Silverveil to seize power in the coming chaos. Visions from the ring confirmed it, his shadow hand in Thorn's betrayal, arrows tipped with whispers of false trust. "Stay hidden," Thorn growled, positioning himself at the crevice, his broad frame a barrier of muscle and regret. But Ilara stepped forward, the iron ring igniting anew, its warmth spreading like liquid fire through her blood. No more hiding. The gift demanded confrontation, the past's ghosts rising to test her resolve. She slipped past him into the night, the snow crunching underfoot like brittle bones, the wind whipping her unbound hair into a wild halo under the moon's unblinking stare. The ravine opened before her, a theater of white drifts and shadowed crags, where torches bloomed like blood oranges in the gloom. Frostclaw hunters, a dozen strong, their armored forms silhouetted against the peaks. Kale at their fore, with a snarl that twisted his once familiar face. "Ilara!" Kale spat, his voice carrying over the gale, laced with feigned surprise that curdled into contempt. His eyes raked her form, lingering on the tattered cloak and the iron ring, now glowing faintly, its rune a beacon of her unveiled power. "The weakling returns, dragging the iron-fanged dog to our mercy. You shame us still, fleeing exile to bed with the enemy?" His pack flanked him, wolves at their heels, eyes gleaming red in the torchlight, the air thick with the scent of pine smoke and anticipation. Behind them, Silverveil shadows stirred, rival alphas, opportunistic vultures drawn by the king's blood trail, their poisoned blades glinting like serpent fangs. 3 kingdoms converged here, in this frozen crucible. Frostclaw's pride, Ironfang's guilt, Silverveil's treachery, all poised on the edge of slaughter. Thorn emerged at her side, dagger drawn, his presence a thunderclap of alpha authority, yet tempered by the ethical wound that made him hesitate. Blood seeped fresh from his side, staining the snow in dark petals, but he stood unbowed, the manto's tatters framing him like a fallen standard. "She is no prize for your games, traitor," he rumbled, his gaze locking on Kyle with the weight of recognition, the beta's hand in the envoy's poison, the fracture of trusts that had nearly toppled his throne. The air crackled with tension, Weavos rising in a symphony of threat, the moon casting long shadows that danced like specters of wars unborn. Ilara's voice cut through, steady as the ring's pulse, her words a weapon forged in exile's forge. "This ends not in blood, Kale, but in truth. I saw it, the web you spun with Silverveil, trading our packs for your crown. War crushes us all, but peace, Peace binds stronger than chains. The hunters shifted, murmurs rippling like wind through pines, doubt flickering in their eyes as the ring's light intensified, projecting ethereal threads into the air, visions of alliances, borders redrawn, kingdoms united against the true devourer, ambition's endless hunger. Kale lunged, blade flashing, but Thorn intercepted, their clash a blur of steel and snarls, blood spraying arc-like under the moon, visceral and hot against the cold. Ilara wove between them, her hands outstretched, the gift surging, a pathfinder's command that stilled the wolves mid-prowl, their howls fading to whimpers. "Choose!" she cried, voice breaking on the edge of tears, the wind carrying her plea like a prayer to the Deusa. Forgive the fractures or drown in them. Love demands freedom, not subjugation. War steals both. Kyle faltered, his blade hovering, eyes widening at the visions that mirrored his secret pacts, exposure's sting sharper than any wound. Thorn pressed the advantage, disarming him with a roar that shook the snow from the crags, but held back the killing blow, guilt's melancholy staying his hand. Redemption's first step, mercy over vengeance. The Silvervale assassins melted into the shadows, routed by the unfolding light, their rival Alpha's growl a retreat into the night. Yet as Kale knelt in the crimson snow, defeated but alive, Ilara faced the true judgment, her pack's eyes on her, no longer scornful but searching, the bond with Thorn a living flame that warmed her core yet threatened her solitude. Freedom whispered of endless wastes, alone with her visions. Love promised union, but at the cost of weaving fates with a king whose wars she must end. What is strength, if not forgiving the betrayers to heal the broken? The philosophy tore at her, a moral precipice under the moon's cold gaze. Blood and fire mingling in the drifts as the wind sighed choices unmade. Thorn's hand found hers amid the hush, the iron ring sealing their shared pulse, but she trembled, the night's chill a mirror to the ethical storm within. The packs watched, breathless, as the first flakes of new snow fell, symbols of rebirth or burial, depending on the path she chose. In that suspended breath, dilemma etched deep, to embrace the Alpha's redemption or shatter the bond for liberty's lonely throne. The moon bore witness, silent and eternal, as Ilara's heart waged its war, the bloodied ring a vow teetering on the edge of war or peace. The snow fell in earnest now, a veil of white mercy descending upon the ravine, softening the bloodied drifts where Kale knelt in defeat, his blade lost to the snow's unyielding embrace. Ilara's hand trembled within Thorn's grasp, the iron ring a forge-hot anchor between them, its bloodied rune pulsing with the rhythm of her fracturing heart. The moon hung at its zenith, a full orb of judgment and grace, bathing the assembled packs in silver light that turned armored forms to statues of frost and fire. Frostclaw eyes, once cold with scorn, now flickered with the dawning of possibility. Silvervale shadows lingered at the edges, their retreat a hesitant whisper against the wind's mournful sigh. The air hung heavy with the scents of pine resin, spilled crimson, and the faint, ethereal tang of the ring's awakened power. Visions still shimmering faintly in the night, threads of silver weaving fates unspoken. She met Thorn's gaze, those gold-flecked depths a mirror to her own turmoil, guilt's melancholy etched in the lines of his face, the weight of a crown that had demanded too much blood. His touch was no command, but a question, warm against the encroaching chill that clawed at her skin like the ghosts of rejection. Freedom beckoned from the wastes beyond, the solitary path of the exile, visions her own to hoard, unburdened by the Alpha's wars or the Pack's chains. To walk it meant renouncing the bond that stirred in her core, instinctive and resisted, a tide of empathy that had bloomed from fear to fragile union. Yet love, she knew now, was no gentle reward, but a forge of redemption, demanding sacrifice, her solitude for his healing, her plans for their shared dawn. What is love, if not the choice to mend what the world has torn? The philosophy echoed in her mind, born of her mother's whispers and the ring's unyielding pulse, a mantra against the storm raging within. Kale lifted his head, his face a mask of shattered ambition, eyes pleading not for mercy, but for absolution from the traitor he had become. The Pax stirred, Huevos low and uncertain, the wind carrying the distant rumble of thunder from the peaks, a Deusa's warning or blessing, veiled in the night's vast silence. Ilara stepped forward, releasing Thorn's hand, the separation a visceral ache that stole her breath, cold flooding back into her limbs like exile's return. No weapon in her grasp, only words sharpened by vision, the iron ring glowing brighter, casting crimson-tinged light across the snow like veins of fate. "Enough," she declared, her voice rising clear and unyielding, threading the gale like a silver arrow. The hunters fell silent, even the wolves at their heels lowering muzzles, compelled by the ring's subtle command, the Pathfinder's gift, no longer hidden, but a beacon against the dark. "3 kingdoms bleed for pride's folly, but I see the web that binds us. Ironfang's strength, Frostclaw's endurance, Silverveil's cunning, woven not in war, but in alliance. Kael's betrayal was ambition's poison, but forgiveness is the antidote. Rise, not as conqueror, but as kin. Let peace crush the cycle, or blood will claim us all." Kael rose slowly, chains of snow falling from his knees, his gaze locking on hers with a mix of shame and reluctant awe. The visions intensified, projected from the ring like moonlight through crystal, halls of forge and ice united, borders dissolved in treaties sealed under the full moon, children playing where warriors once fell. Murmurs rippled through the Pax, torches sputtering as hands lowered weapons, the metallic clink of steel yielding to the wind's soft hush. Thorn watched her, his manto rasgado stirring in the breeze, blood from his wounds freezing into dark crystals on his skin, a living testament to the cost. Pride warred in his eyes, the ethical king tempted to reclaim his throne by force, yet held by the melancholy of lessons learned. Power without compassion was a hollow roar, echoing only in graves. She turned to him then, the moon framing her form in ethereal glow, unbound hair whipping like banners of resolve. "Thorn, your guilt chains you tighter than any rival's blade. Heal with me, not as king and subject, but as equals in this web. Union demands sacrifice. Your wars ended, my visions shared, or I walk alone, and the kingdoms shatter." Her words hung, a precipice of choice, the ring's heat searing her finger as if the Deusa herself urged the leap. Fear coiled in her gut, the instinct to flee warring with the bond's insistent pull, a romantic tragedy unfolding in the frozen night, tenderness forged in the crucible of pain. He stepped closer, the snow crunching under his boots, his hand cupping her cheek with a gentleness that belied his warrior's frame. The touch ignited the air, warmth spreading from his palm to chase the frost from her soul, blood from his unbandaged gash smearing her skin in a visceral seal. "You are no weakling, Ilara," he murmured, voice rough with emotion, gold eyes shimmering like embers under lunar fire. "You are redemption's architect. I choose you. Union, healing, the peace you envision. Let my crown serve your light." The Pax exhaled as one, Huevos transforming from threat to triumphant chorus, the wind carrying the sound across the mountains like a prophecy fulfilled. Ilara's heart surged, resistance crumbling into acceptance, the bond solidifying not as submission, but as rebirth. She clasped his hand, the iron ring bridging them, its bloodied rune flaring once before settling into a steady glow, a symbol of wounds closed, destinies entwined. Kael bowed his head, pledging fealty to the new weave. Silverveil envoys emerged from shadows, blades sheathed in token of truce. No sacrifice of life, but of old selves. Her exile ended in embrace, his guilt transmuted into purpose. They stood together as the snow thickened, blanketing the ravine in pristine white, the moon's light a benediction on their union. Peace bloomed, not in conquest, but in choice. 3 kingdoms mended by an Omega's unseen strength, her plan a quiet revolution that crushed war's shadow without a single weapon raised. In that renascent hush, Ilara felt the Deusa's whisper in the wind. Every wound heals in mercy's light. Thorn drew her close, their breaths mingling in visible puffs, the night's chill yielding to the fire of shared redemption. The packs dispersed into the dawn's first blush, alliances forged under the fading moon, leaving the ravine to silence and snow, a temple of what had been broken and reborn. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.